And really, one could argue the next move by government to bring in so much demand into the real estate market is effectively going to overload the system itself. And once you overwhelm something, public perception around the concept changes a lot. Welcome to the Urban Property Investor. I'm your host, Sam Saggers, here to help you crack the code of real estate wealth. Today's show, we're going to dig into really a style of housing shift, which is driven off political agendas. Yes, we're going to break down really what I think is going to overload the real estate market and potentially just create a whole new way of thinking about real estate. Are we actually morphing from a capitalist country when it comes to wealth creation from real estate investment to actually a socialist country, which is really driven from the idea that we've got to put roofs over people's heads and just slow down on the economic uplift of real estate? How would we get to a place where effectively real estate investment is no longer part of the puzzle? Let's have a chat about it. I think it's a worthy conversation of a podcast. So today we're going to dig into the Cloward Piven style housing shift. Yes, we're going to draw on the political economic theories of Cloward and Piven, those old chestnuts. But hey, welcome back, regulars. Play the program in double speed. Get your life back. All the episodes I've done are lessons on real estate, so feel free to go back in time if Cloward Piven style of housing shift does not rock your boat. But hey, the idea of Cloward Piven goes back to the 1960s. It was a bit of a radical kind of economic concept that if you just want change, you basically create policies and as a government, potentially strain the system to justifying basically creating a new economic system. And that's really the Cloward Piven model. And it was a model developed, designed a little bit radical, but designed to kind of create socialism in government areas and in industries within a capitalist environment. So really the model, if you like, is overload the system until it doesn't work and oversee the destruction of the system. So once the system destructs, you replace it with you replace the former system with the new system, and that in itself is really the model of political change. And so what does any of that have to do with the price of fish? Well, let's talk about the Cloward Piven price of fish, because one can describe really what next inside the Australian real estate market as a bit of a scorched earth policy. What happens if we just create a situation and financially engineer the real estate market to grow in value to the point where one last boom changes everything? And really, one could argue that the next phase of the Australian property market may just be the last boom that you will see in a very, very long time. And as a result of it, may actually change the political landscape around real estate forever. Now, think about what is about to unfold. Think about what is coming our way when it comes to real estate. We've got low interest rates. We've got a shortage of stock. Tradespeople in many places are being rerouted to government jobs and big infrastructure projects such as the Brisbane Olympic Games. we're not producing enough real estate to keep up with demand. And we've got this incredible amount of immigration, which is unfolding every single year. Every single year, we come up with a quota of how many people we want in the country, and we expect that quota to take about 12 months to be met, and we tend to meet the quota within 6 or 7 months. We are at record-breaking speed when it comes to population growth, one of the fastest in the world. We are in the top 10 countries in the world, growing fast. And so we've got record low building, record high migration, huge infrastructure spends, low rates. We're now in a downward spiral when it comes to the interest rate market. Interest rates are dropping. We've just had rate cuts. We'll have more rate cuts. And then, of course, to add fuel to the fire, the federal government has come up with a plan to basically fund 100,000 places of first home buyers coming into the marketplace, basically funding them into a deal, allowing them to buy real estate with basically a very, very low amount of money. So that next wave of 100,000 people coming into the market is a huge amount of people and will game change, particularly the lower end of the marketplace, the most affordable end of the marketplace. And really, you could argue that because the model of rising costs of living, essentials are very, very hard for a lot of people to keep up with, rent and mortgage costs. Wages aren't growing when adjusted to inflation. Government debt's fairly high, personal debt's fairly high. Education, as a pathway to an outcome, often is leaving people with a HECS debt, a financial burden, rather than a prosperous future. You've got effectively surplus unemployment masked by things like people having to drive Uber or do fast food deliveries or casual contracts. And really, there's a lot of overqualified people that are basically financially illiterate in our world at the moment. And of course, all of this gravitates to today. We have a housing affordability crisis. We have a housing affordability crisis. And really, I've given some insights into fixing the housing affordability crisis using some basic logic, some simple, pragmatic ideas to get the housing crisis more even for people. And I won't go into all of them today, but really one could argue most politicians are ignoring the reality of just making things affordable and actually going into this Cloward-Piven model of housing style change by just scorching the marketplace. If you create and financially engineer one more property boom, you are going to change the landscape of property forever. And one could argue it's one of the best ways to just end some of the debates around real estate investment. One could argue that it is the best way to erode the middle class from creating their own wealth just by creating one more boom. And I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but really the idea of just pushing prices up that then pushes property investors out is really a scorched earth model that could unfold. Now, property investors want higher prices because they're property investors and they want real estate to grow in value. They want their real estate to go up the day they buy it. They want affordable properties, but equally, they want to take those affordable properties and turn them into expensive properties. It's the nature of the beast of the property investor. Now, Cloud Piven really is this kind of idea that a crisis triggers forcing a structural reform of how things work. And it was designed originally to overwhelm the welfare system, which would effectively socialize a proportion of the United States. And it was just an economic political theory. You overwhelm something so it doesn't work, so it has to change. And that in itself shifts public expectation around what is delivered from whom. Now, currently, property investments deliver the rental market properties to live in. Property investment from mum and dad property investors. And I often refer to them as property savers because they're really just regular people who've worked pretty hard in their world, got a decent enough income, got equity in their family home, and they basically take some equity out of their family home and bet on a new property to help them reach their financial goals. And quite often for most people, it's just about buying one investment property, which helps them later in life, in retirement, boost their retirement package, if you like. They may sell the property, they may rent the property, but for a lot of people in Australia, 99% of property investors effectively just have one property. And one property as an investment. They may own their family home and one property. But for a lot of society, that model is a model that is continuously attacked. And we saw in 2009, Bill Shorten, at the time the leader of the Labor Party, tried to win an election by effectively undoing property investment, by undoing what property investors get a gain with, which is known as the ability to negatively gear their property. And negative gearing is just a formula that for a property investor, if they take the risk of investing in real estate, the government gives them a tax offset for doing the government a favor by providing a property to the rental marketplace. The losses incurred by that investment can be carried forward into your taxable income, lowering your taxable income, so you effectively pay less income tax when you go to work. That's really the model as it stands. And Bill Shorten lost that election because he threatened that model. And for the Labor Party, that was a bit of a hard pill to swallow because that is really one of their, I guess, staples is to socialize housing, to make it more equitable. And conversely to that, right now, the Labor Party has just introduced this wave of demand when the real estate market really does not need a wave of demand. There is just an inability to produce stock right now, and the demand coming through the system won't buy that stock. It won't buy just brand new real estate. It will buy all sorts of real estate in all sorts of places. Providing more demand right now when you cannot produce feasible sites to develop is arguably going to create a Cloud Piven pivot concept of structural change. It's going to create a scorched earth process. Who's going to be the beneficiary of the scorched earth process in the short term is going to be anyone who's in the market. You're going to see property values bump up in price. You're going to see capital growth. I've seen some statistics from banks, and banks are already forecasting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% capital growth next year when all of this unfolds. I'm getting calls from real estate agents to put my couple of my investments on the market now, and I'm saying to them, absolutely no. Like, in the next 2 years, we're going to see a huge amount of capital growth come to the marketplace. It's going to be policy-led capital growth, led from effectively a cloud pivot concept of just, you cannot break the system, let's burn the system. If you don't want people to claim negative gearing benefits, rather than get rid of negative gearing, how about you just make property investment properties so expensive that no one can property invest? And of course, that is where we potentially will find ourselves, a shift in expectations as to where rental properties come from. The idea is pretty simple. You overload the system and then you change the system. And really, one could argue the next move by government to bring in so much demand into the real estate market is effectively going to overload the system itself. And once you overwhelm something, public perception around the concept changes a lot. And again, like, if we were to look at where we're at when it comes to the ability to mobilize something completely different, we're there. We're already there. We're already there. Right now, around Australia, companies are effectively creating real estate, which is known as build to rent. Build to rent. So perhaps we're at the tail end of property investors providing rental properties to the rental market. How do we get rid of them? Well, let's just create one last wave of growth, which takes most people out of the market based on serviceability. People will still be able to buy their PPOR, their principal place of residence, but unlikely to go and be able to buy another property as an investment. And of course, when people aren't investing and they're incapable of creating wealth for themselves, then all of a sudden, politically, they start to think about things quite differently. And when you look at the political narrative around housing, quite often those people who have built wealth through housing are very aligned with the Liberal Party. Not always, but as a generalization, they're very aligned with the Liberal Party. People who haven't built wealth and are starting out on their journey or have run into challenges with just getting ahead in this world are quite often very aligned to the Labor Party. So how do you control more political voters if you are in power as the Labor Party? Well, why wouldn't you just learn to privatize the investment marketplace? Take it out of the hands of the people. Make sure that people don't become wealthy out of property, and you will create, in effect, more people that are socially in line with your policies as a party. How do you do that? How do you remove property investors from the property market? Well, why not do a cloud pivot strategy and just accelerate the capital growth during your term of power, you will then create some raving fans, but you will also end the context of property investment. And of course, what you then do is create a tax system which encourages institutional build to rent and NDIS. And all of a sudden, you've got NDIS accommodation for a lot of Australians. And right now, one could argue a lot of the NDIS space is being rorted. 1 in 6 people, young men today, are now on the NDIS. No one knows why, but we're seeing a huge socialization of the NDIS. Then you've got this new concept coming into Australian real estate called build to rent. Now, I just got back from Melbourne and I went to a build to rent scheme in an inner city suburb of Melbourne, and I was in shock. Like, you are talking a building which kind of, it could be out of a Russian horror film. It is a brand new building, but it looks like it's from the Cold War. And it's kind of mind-blowing to think that institutionally that has been created from our superannuation. Pension funds, super funds, are now taking charge of housing. Pension funds and super funds, industry funds, are funds that are quite often run through the unions. The unions are winning the jobs to build the housing. And again, how do you end up in a society where the renter can either have 2 choices? They can rent for life and have long tenure, or they can get themselves into the property market and be a homeowner, but not a homeowner plus an investor. Well, you socialize effectively the landlord market. You institutionalize it. And once you institutionalize something, once you reform the system that people are basically used to getting their housing from government, you start to eradicate the idea that wealth creation in true capitalism comes from the hard-earned efforts of individuals. People start to rely on the state. Now, when I lived in Sweden, I lived in a socialist country, and there was no real such thing as a private landlord that provided housing to the rental marketplace. There were the odd person that did do that, but 99% of rental properties came through the system. They came from the state. You put your name on a waiting list and you got housed. You put your preference as to what neighborhood you would like to live and you got housed, and you paid money to effectively the state. The state was and is the system of housing. And again, if mum and dad investors are basically considered a problem because of the tax benefits that mum and dad investors need to invest, and it's politically insensitive to try and tackle it at the polling booth, really one of the ways around that is just to scorch the earth, to overload the system, to change the system through just creating capital growth and at the same time rewarding corporations to bring stock to marketplace. And that creates with it a structural shift in public expectation. All of a sudden, the public starts to go, well, I'm going to mobilize around who provides the housing to me. The government of the day is providing the housing to me. I'm not going to change government. What if that new government undoes this public reform? And that's where I think you're starting to see, in a way, this erosion of the middle class, but really not a free market adjustment to the what next for real estate. You know, is the current situation with real estate a fault of the market, or is it a fault of government? Well, it's a fault of government. Government is always in the way, and things like the first homeowner grant, things like the negative gearing, things like the policies which have been created over the years is all to do with government. If you just left it a free market, I would imagine real estate would not be as expensive as it is today. If there is less people coming into the market, there's less demand, prices drop. However, Australia is addicted to the wealth effect because we're a services economy. 95% of people serve each other. They work for each other. They serve each other. And to stimulate spending of people serving each other, and if you can't create wage growth, typically you've created the wealth effect. So that is shrinking, though, for people. That is a shrinking pathway. And what is unfolding is, of course, people who are creating the wealth effect are quite often even wealthy to begin with. When you've got $10 million worth of real estate, you only need 10% growth to make $1 million. When you've got nothing, 10% growth does nothing for you. And so the idea of really the Cloward-Piven political system is you overload the system. That creates really hysteria and oversees the destruction of the system, and you replace the former system with a new system. It solves political problems by effectively creating a scorched earth campaign. So what has this got to do with the price of fish? Well, I think we are going through an economic change, and you want to get in now before perhaps you're priced out of the marketplace. And I've seen this in New Zealand. New Zealand really went into a place where they created so much government interference into the property marketplace. It really ended up not being a free property market whatsoever. It was just a government policy-driven real estate marketplace. And off the back of it, it has just led to an inability for property investors to be part of the game anymore. They've been wiped out. Property values are high. People can't borrow money to be an investor, to invest. And you still obviously have the foundation piece of home buying and home equity in New Zealand, but you just really don't have property investors that are now in charge of providing properties to the rental marketplace. You really have now build to rent and government doing that job. So those in charge of the market in Australia over the last 30, 40 years have been mum and dad property investors building wealth. And sometimes mum and dad property investors have got themselves to a place where they own 9, 10, 11, 12 investments, providing 10 rental properties to the rental market. Sometimes the property investors that are providing the rental properties to the rental market earn less than the tenants who are renting the properties off the investors. It's amazing what has unfolded in Australia over the last 3 decades has been incredible to be part of. I've been part of it. I've dedicated my entire life to it, to the idea that you can become effectively a great capitalist out of being a property investor. And I think you still can and you still will be moving forward, but it's going to get very hard if you don't surround yourself with the right team that can navigate the cloud pivot change in real estate, the housing shift to socialism. There's going to be all sorts of tax creation and meddling in the system to throw you off track. There's going to be advanced capital gains tax, as we've seen put into play. Melbourne's put a land tax in, as we've seen to play. You're going to see retrofitting of thermal efficiency on real estate. You're going to see that it's harder to be a landlord. You've got to provide better security, better lease tenure, better inclusions in a property. All of that is already happening now, and it's going to continue to be thrown at property investors. The idea of let's just burn it all and make it so hard for mum and dad to do this. And in the background, let's go and work with major companies to provide housing to Australia. Let's give the big Australian companies on the Australian Stock Exchange that work in Australian property development tax breaks to do this as build to rent. Why have them build it and then sell it, and then the people who are buying it rent it? That's just an extra layer. Why not just have the company rent it? And of course, why not fund it or do a joint venture with our own superannuation fund? And that is what is unfolding. And of course, when you're renting from effectively a quasi-government model, you're very unlikely to want to see a change of government because you are drawn in by the hand that is feeding you. And so we've just got to understand that I think there's a boom coming, and I think that boom is an economic illusion, Now, couldn't you be the beneficiary of the economic illusion? You got to get in now. You're going to make a couple of $100,000. You could double, you could see something go skyrocket in value. But if you miss this one, this is the tough part. This is the real tough part. If you miss the next 3 years in the market, can you even get back into the market? That's the question I have. That is the question I have. The median value for real estate in Australia, the new normal is $1 million. And for a property investor to spend $1 million on property investing plus the other costs to live plus their own home, it takes a bit of doing. And for a lot of people, they just want to spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on real estate. But ultimately, that's probably something that you needed to do 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because it is eradicated. So how do we eradicate the next wave of people going, well, I'll provide the rental properties to the rental market. I'll get the tax deductions. I'll become wealthy. And in doing so, create a society which is really two components, the haves and the have-nots. And really to slow down the have and have-not society, you just deploy the effectively cloud pivot model, just overload the system. It's the best way to do it. And I think really there's a political narrative, a theory behind maybe the power that is in charge to let's just overload it. Because it's kind of blowing my mind that you bring so many people into the country, you don't provide enough housing, the builders can't keep up with the cost of the sheer cost of building a home. The market is struggling to interface with that dynamic as it stands. But now you overload the system by just throwing 100,000 people with really no money. They haven't no money. They've just saved $30,000, $40,000. You get them into the market. You provide this last punch, the knockout blow, and you push the market up. You financially engineer the market to go up to the point where you are solving a political problem long term. You are solving a political problem long term. The long-term political problem for Australia is inequality. Inequality. How do you solve it? Well, you just let go of the people that created the wealth and make it virtually impossible for them to re-enter the market themselves. They have what they have. Let them take it to their grave. And everyone else, you start the system again. And effectively, it's a form of socialism. And again, like I've lived in I tried to be a socialist, and I found it very, very difficult because of just the lack of really self-accountability that you just stuck on the drug. And in Sweden, when I lived in Sweden, basically everyone went to university till virtually 30 years of age, got paid by the state and rented properties off the state. And eventually they got a job and did the same thing, had babies and did the same thing all on over again. It's a real lack of entrepreneurial flair when I lived in Sweden. That was a long time ago, but maybe things have changed. But Sweden provided, basically, is a socialist model. And, they're good socialists, good people, happy people. They're not, complete Marxists and, trying to go to war with people over the ideology. But the system itself is about the state providing just about everything and high taxes. And that in itself can kill productivity. So anyway, today's show is a little bit more of an economic theory. It's a hunch. I can't prove any of this. You may think I'm a bit of a crackpot, but I thought it worth talking about because I'm certainly seeing some signals which blow my mind that we're potentially going to have another little property boom. We're going to have prices rise again, just coming out of an inflationary environment, going back into a growth environment inside of real estate, pushes the cost of living up. Is it just a political narrative to scorch the earth, burn it down, get rid of the property investors once and for all, and we can go to a new model? And of course, how do you fight fire with fire? Well, just be a property investor. Just get on with it. Get into the market before potentially you become a little panda bear. And I'll be a panda bear until the day I die. And there may only be a few of us who are capable of property investing. We'll work out how to do it together. There's ways around the system. Joint ventures, syndications, co-investing. There's ways to play the game. And that's why you got to be part of a model, part of a team, part of a group that is constantly thinking about this stuff. Really, that's really important, I think, moving forward, because it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be simple. Property investment, once upon a time, was pretty simple. You bought a property, you rented it out. That was it. That was the model. Now you got to buy a property. Think about thermal efficiency. Make sure the property is part of the guidelines of the rental marketplace. You're up against build to rent. What are they doing with their real estate investments? You're fighting fire now with first home buyers coming into the market. That they can buy a property with $40,000, the same property you need $160,000. How do you play the game? How do you play the game of capitalist when real estate is socializing, when real estate is becoming a socialist model? And hopefully this is serves as a bit of a wake-up call. I just wanted to share it as the wake-up call. Get into it. Don't sit on the fence. All right, folks, thanks for your time. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Property Investor. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'd love for you to rate the show and share it with your family and friends. Let's spread the word about property investing. Stay connected between episodes on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And check out the rest of our podcast network at positivementor.com.au. And if you're serious about growing your property portfolio, don't miss our complimentary Property Investor Nights. Register now via the link in the show notes. See you next time.